Good evening, depending on where you're joining us from here today. Thank you for joining our weekly Tuesday live stream. This is a weekly transformation or digital transformation focused live stream where we interview different guests and talk about different topics related to digital transformation. This interview actually becomes part of our weekly transformation ground control podcast. So you're getting to see sort of the live production behind the scenes here today. So thank you for joining. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO at Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach their third stages of digital transformation success. And I'm excited for today's guest, who I'm going to introduce in just a moment. But before I introduce our guest, just a couple of logistical items. First of all, this is meant to be a very interactive conversation. So our goal here today is to cover a topic that I'll discuss here in just a moment, but the goal here is to get as many questions and interactions from the audience as possible. So any sorts of questions or comments you have for either myself or our guest, please feel free to chime in at any point, and we'll get to your questions as we're going through the conversation here today. Secondly, if you could just drop in the chat and let us know where you're joining from today. What part of the world are you joining? What city are you in? What country are you in? We typically draw a global audience for these live events, so would love to hear where you're all from today. So if you wouldn't mind just dropping in the chat where you're joining from today, I'd love to hear your feedback on that and get a feel for where you're all from. So today's topic that we are going to discuss is how to avoid CIO failure. And the subtitle to that is Lessons for CIOs, IT managers, and transformation leaders. And the whole idea or the whole concept we want to discuss today is, first of all, what are some of the challenges of being a CIO or an IT leader within an organization, whether you're going through some sort of formalized transformation or whether you're just managing sort of the status quo. What are some of those challenges of being a chief information officer, chief digital officer, IT director, IT manager, any sort of IT leader in an organization? What are some of the biggest challenges that individuals are facing? So that's really the focus we wanted to hone in on here today. And this is actually building on a topic that we discussed a few weeks ago on this live stream, which is also available on our Transformation Ground Control podcast. And actually, we had the same guest for that discussion, which is discussing the evolving role of a CIO and how the CIO's role is evolving over time and how it's changing. So we sort of wanted to build on that and discuss that in a little bit more detail, but really dive into how to avoid failure, because CIOs typically have a bullseye on them oftentimes, and they're under a lot of pressure to align the people, process, and technology pieces of their organization. So really wanted to dive into what does it take to make a CIO or IT manager successful? How can they better lead and manage change? And what are some of the lessons learned and pitfalls that we've seen with our clients throughout the organization or throughout the world? So that's really the focus of what we wanted to discuss here today. And joining me for this discussion is a guest that we've had on in the past. Several weeks ago or several episodes ago of this podcast, we had him on here, and that is Ridwaan Bardien, who is the director. We're one of the directors of our Third Stage Consulting South Africa or Africa office. So he is part of the African footprint and our team on the ground in Africa. So Ridwaan, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Eric. And great to be back again. It feels like it was yesterday.
Yeah, it was just a few short weeks ago that you were on the show, and so thanks for being back. In fact, we had such a good conversation, and there's so much we didn't cover in that conversation. We thought let's continue it and maybe put a little bit different spin on it here today. Yeah. Before we jump into the questions, though, maybe just tell us a little bit about your background, both what you do now at Third Stage, but also what you did prior to joining Third Stage.
Sure. Thanks, Eric. Yeah, and thanks for having me once again. I actually quite enjoyed the last interaction, and I got some good feedback. So let's hope we can have the same kind of conversation today. So at Third Stage, I'm based in Johannesburg. As those of you in South Africa, that's why it's very, very cold here. It does get cold in Africa. It just doesn't snow, only in certain places. So as a director at Third Stage, I work with companies on their digital transformation projects. So anything from strategy all the way to software selection and business process re-engineering, as well as, which is very, very important and always overlooked, is change management. So prior to joining Third Stage, I was an executive partner at Gartner for about 5 years. And in there, at any point in time, you have a portfolio of about 30 CIOs, C-level executives or CDOs. And part of that role was also a bit of coaching and mentoring. But also prior to that, I also held about, I think, two roles as a chief information officer. So I bring the theory, and I also bring the practical aspects of it.
Yeah, you've been sort of a CIO whisperer over the years in terms of coaching and guiding and helping CIOs through pretty
Correct.
complex transformations, which is really what we want to dive into here today.
Mm.
Well,
Sure.
good. Well, that's great to hear. And just to spotlight our audience here before I jump into the questions, thank you, Diane, on LinkedIn, joining from South Africa as well. Gasper LaRocca on LinkedIn, joining from Baltimore. We have someone joining, Ursula, joining from London. Audra from Atlanta. Don from Tampa, thanks for being here. Sam Graham from Spain, thank you for being here again today, Sam. And just a general comment before we get started. And this is actually an interesting thing to keep in the back of our minds as we're talking here today, Ridwaan. And this is, I like the topic for today. I've been looking into becoming something like a CIO, CTO, or something similar. So learning a lot from these discussions. And that's really what we hope we'll discuss with you here today, is just what does it take to be successful? What are some of the pitfalls and challenges and lessons learned? And how can we really set you all up for success, whether you're a CIO now or whether you're aspiring to be one, if you're a consultant and you work with CIOs, or if you're just generally trying to understand how CIOs fit into the greater scheme of things. That's really what we want to dive into here today. I guess just to get started, though, just to set the context or the backdrop for the discussion, maybe just tell us a little bit about what are the general responsibilities of a CIO. And when I say CIO, by the way, I'm going to kind of use that interchangeably to include chief digital officer, IT manager, IT director, just sort of the IT leader within an organization. So what exactly does that CIO role do typically in an organization?
So if you look at it traditionally, right, I think it started in the 80s when they first came up with the role, and it came out of what the financial services part of the organization. So it's literally looking after information, things like that. And interestingly enough, you still find that CIOs are reporting to CFOs. So I'm a little wary of putting everybody in the same box. So, but I get what you're saying. Like, what do they actually look after? So, the short answer would be, it's the information technology portion of the business, right? So it's the traditional stuff. It's the infrastructure, the networks, the vendor management, the ERP system. But we have seen that is no longer, if I can use the word, good enough for organizations, because you have to be competitive. And in today's world, to be competitive, we find that's where the CDO role has come about, is that it's now chasing revenue, looking at different business models, still using technology, but your focus is not so much about uptime and things like that. So, but I find that generally, and at Gartner, I work globally, so it is a global perspective that I'm giving. I still find that a lot of CIOs are still stuck in the back office and seen in that role. I find that a lot of that's still happening. Just as a matter of interest, with shadow IT, for those who don't know, is when a business goes off and does its own thing. And I remember, as a CIO, allowing that to happen. And when I was at Gartner, we also had research that said allow that to happen, because that's the other thing that's starting to impact on CIOs. Is that role is now coming more and more into the spotlight. So yes, even though I say that's what your portfolio is, be aware that it's already started, that should no longer be your portfolio, depending where you are, in which organization you're in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, it seems like that there's really, in my mind, there's two major buckets of functions or responsibility that a CIO has. You have the stuff you're talking about, which is sort of the back office systems focus, keep the lights on, keep things running, maintain the systems, fix them when they break, sort of that maintenance focused support and maintenance focused side of the equation. But then the other side of the equation is the more strategic or proactive side of things, which is how do you continuously improve your business and ensure that you're leveraging new technologies where appropriate and getting ahead of just fixing and breaking or fixing stuff that's broken, but really more strategically deploying new technologies throughout an organization. So it seems like there's two sort of very different areas of focus that a CIO typically is responsible for. So what do you think the most important skills are given this backdrop? And we'll talk more about how the role's changing and how the skill sets required are changing. But what are the
Yeah.
major skills that a CIO typically needs to be successful in that role?
So if I look at the CIO and the CDO role, you'll find that they are a lot more politically savvy. So they and it's interesting if you think about it. I remember when I had went for my first CIO interview, MBA wasn't a thing that was needed, but today
Right.
that's a requirement, right? And did nobody sit up and take notice and say, but why are they asking these technical people to have MBAs? So the shift already happened. That happened years ago. So I find that those who are like get better at this or surviving longer and sort of had because as we see 10 with CIOs, 10 years are very, very short. There used to be a time when the acronym stood for career is over. But so what we find is that those who are politically more astute or a lot more about the business. So, for example, somebody I see one of the questions: what's the difference between? It's a generic title. What's the difference between a healthcare CIO and a higher education CIO? If you put them somewhere and you were interviewing them, they must sound like they a business person from healthcare and talk about healthcare. If they in higher education or logistics, and they must talk about the business and what they are doing in the business. If your CIO is still tinkering in the background and looking at setting up data centers and focusing on the technology bits and things, they're not going to be around for long. Public sector, I know it's an unfair statement, but yeah, public sector, yes, you can still get away with that. They typically still tend to CFOs, but we see that more and more that boards have taken an interest in this role. So you'll find now that these guys are. It's interesting. And I saw it in America first. That they are now they go to board meetings. They accompany the CEO and they talk about what they are doing because they're very, very interested in that. And in America, what I saw is that there was this. They started to sit on boards. It started with the startups, the Mark Zuckerbergs and people like that sitting on boards. That's an interesting thing, and not on startups, on large multinational companies. So we see that that's something that's happening with CIOs now. So in a nutshell, CIOs are more like business people. That's what they are. They're becoming more and more about business. If you're aspiring to become a CIO, which I'm seeing, get your MBA, start learning more about the business. Because if you're going to go down the technical route, then you'll end up being like a data scientist or a specialist. Nothing wrong with that. Some people love that. But if your aspiration is to become a CIO, CDO, you need to be more focused on the business side of things.
Yeah, and I'd say that CIOs, more than most roles in organizations, really require a very broad skill set because you need, first of all, you need to understand technology, and that alone, if even if all your focus is just understanding new and emerging technologies, that's just changing so fast, and keeping up with all the changes, that alone is very difficult. But then you add in the other skill sets that are so important, but yet oftentimes underrated with CIOs, things like the operational business process understanding, the people and the change management and the leadership component of transformation. Those are all very different skill sets, and it's hard to get all those skills, quite frankly. So I think that's one of the big challenges. Would you agree? Is just sort of
Correct.
having depth, but also having that breadth and broad skill set that's required to be an effective leader in that role.
Correct. So, and also so, yeah. So traditionally, you would come through as either in programming or something, and then you ended up being a CIO. That's no longer the case now, unless you're a CTO. That's a whole different. It's different from a CIO. It's more technology focused. But definitely a broader a skill set, and interestingly, things like the political savviness, which means that you have empathy, you have the ability to read a room, and also things like being a good communicator. So, and I've seen an instance where there was a lawyer who became a CIO. So you don't have to come from the traditional IT background anymore. And because really, if you sit and you think about it, and I remember doing this one day when I was a CIO, I said I came to the realization that I can be outsourced from me to this entire department can be outsourced. Everything we're doing as we are doing it right now can be outsourced, can be done better, cheaper, faster. So I said, how do we stay in the game? Let's go learn the business. Let's make sure that they won't get rid of us because we are so intertwined with what they were doing. And eventually we started to use their language. Yeah, there were still the guys who did the back office type stuff. You'd still have that program and that to do that, and that's fine. You need them, but we made sure that we were starting to understand the business more, and then proposing solutions to them, and then saying, here's the technology that will help you achieve your what
Right.
you need. Because think about it, and it's happened. I mean, I've actually just seen it with one of the clients recently. They've actually gone out and engaged with a software vendor directly, and the CIO is in the background. It's very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting.
Mm.
Here's a question that has actually been asked twice now. Whoops. I try and show it if I can avoid my own user error here. Whoops. Let me come back to it. That is not the one I wanted to show you. Sorry. There it is. Okay. So this is Diane on LinkedIn was the first one to ask this, but someone else has since asked the same question or asked again for us to cover this. But how would you define the difference between a CIO, which is Chief Information Officer, and CDO, which is typically referred to as Chief
Yeah,
Digital Officer? How would you view that difference, or how would you
it's
describe that
interesting.
difference?
It's interesting, Eric, because it keeps coming up. This one.
It does.
It does, yeah. So I'm gonna answer it in a way that it's not unfair to all CIOs. So if you're in an organization where you have a CIO and a CDO, then you tend to find that the CIO focuses on operations and back office, more like a chief operations officer of IT, which is also a little bit of an unfair statement because there is room for innovation and looking at how you increase your revenue and things like that. But it's all based around the existing business model and existing revenue streams and driving down cost in that business. So if that's what your business traditionally does, that's what the CIO will focus on to make
Mm,
sure that works. If you have a CIO in that same building with that, or you can't say the hybrid working space that we're in, if there's a CDO as well, then you'll find the CDO is chasing revenue. They're looking at other at other they're looking at AI, robotics, they're looking at the customer experience, they're looking at new business models. So they focus more on the revenue aspects, and the boards pay particular attention to these guys. Now, typically when the CDO is brought in, I'm not saying it's always the case, we find it's because the CIO hasn't stepped up. We find that, but it's
mm,
also unfair because in sometimes the CDO is just better at it. They come with a more of a revenue mindset, and so that's why they bring it in. So, like I said, I didn't want to be unfair to some CIOs because I've seen CIOs in some of these large organizations and smaller ones where there is no CDO, but they've stepped up. So they've maintained the title CIO, but they are chasing new revenue streams. They are looking at different. They're outsourcing more of the back office type stuff. So um, it's not so much about the title; it's about what you are doing. So
mhm.
you should be focused. If you're a CIO in a large multinational, then if you are not chasing new revenue, new ways of working, driving down cost, sitting at the boardroom and the exco and talking about the business, you're not going to be there for very long. That's
Right.
we've seen that. Yeah. To come to the title, what will get you fired? That will get you fired. Yeah.
Right. Well, and one of the other roles or titles that it may seem like we're slicing hairs a little bit, but it's important to think this through in terms of the differences between CIO, Chief Digital Officer, but also there's you mentioned CTO, which is generally Chief Technology Officer, but
Technology
there's
officer.
also
Yeah.
another CTO role, which is Chief Transformation Officer, which you're seeing more. We're seeing that more and more. It's not extremely common, but we do have a subset of our clients where they have a designated or a dedicated chief technology officer or I'm sorry, chief transformation
Transformation
officer
officer.
role. Well, how is that different, or is that something you've seen as well?
S- It's not common in Africa. We've not seen that, but I would assume it sounds almost like a CDO type role. That's
Yeah,
what it sounds like. Yeah. I'm assuming
yeah,
it's nothing to do with organizational change management. I would assume it's more like a CDO role. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
We've seen that.
I think it's actually, in my opinion, it's sort of adding another layer of responsibility to what, in theory, should really be part of the CIO's role, which is leading change. So if you have chief transformation officer, oftentimes that's the person that's sort of like the program manager. They're the leader of the transformation initiative. So if you have a large
Yeah.
multi-year transformation initiative, some organizations will have a chief transformation officer. Maybe not as common in Africa where you're at, but we've seen it
Mm.
certainly in the Americas and Europe. We've seen some clients that have that. It's not,
Okay.
like I said, it's not that common, but it is something we're seeing more of now than we did, 5 or 10 years ago.
Interesting. We've not seen that here yet. Well, I haven't not
Yeah.
seen that.
Good. I was going to actually bring up another question from the audience here, another point here, or it's actually just more of a comment. And this is from Gassan on LinkedIn. He says, shadowing IT, if allowed, interferes with IT governance, encourages best of breed. And best of breed encourages multiple versions of the truth, which leads us back to looking at strategies to address disparate systems. So, this is a really interesting point. I think I kind of wanted to turn it into a question, which is, if you allow that shadow IT that you mentioned before that you're talking about, or maybe put it even more broadly, you allow different pockets of the organization to sort of do their own thing, define their own path, chart their own strategy for their digital technologies, you're going to end up likely with a best of breed scenario, and you're stuck trying to patch that all together. How do you, what are some of the tactics or strategies you've seen organizations use to overcome that dynamic or mitigate that risk?
So look, you could still you're still responsible if you're the CIO, and I'll give you an interesting take on why I did it when I talk about political savviness. So, I just want to say, when I was at Gartner, we used to run workshops. We have CIOs and we have to talk about these different topics. This was one of the most hotly contested, and guys would get angry. You'd get some say, no, no, let it go, and others are like, no. If you have your strong governance, you can still allow that to happen, because at some point it has to come back into you. So you still maintain, you still look at what they're trying to do. If they are going off and trying to implement an ERP system, you're gonna like, no. So you need, there's a fine balance, right? So I'll give you an example. So that's where you bring the governance in. What is it that they are doing? If they are exploring front end stuff, a new website, you allow that. You pick your battles. You can't be a Dr. No and try and do everything. The business will bypass you. Because you'll find that, especially today, here's the challenging bit, right? The resources they can find to do stuff with them, you can't get anymore or retain. You can't get that. You'll get that person in, and they're out the door. They can go and buy that and outsource it, and so they'll do it. So you just work with, you partner with them. So I came across this in my career, and this is where political savviness came in. It was the chief operations officer, and I had a good relationship with him, and he used to support each other at Exco and things like that. And then he went off and he wanted to do his own data analytics thing. I didn't have the team for it, and then my team was fighting me. Why are you allowing this to happen? And I did it for political reasons. So I stayed close to it, but I let him do his thing. And by me letting, and we worked together, eventually it came back to me. Imagine if I said to him, no, you will not do that. Then, so you've got to be, that's what I'm talking about, that political savviness, astuteness. It's not binary anymore. You're not in that technology world where it's binary. So when I say you have to have this political astuteness to be able to navigate in that, those are CIOs that's going to survive, because he was politically so strong. He could have gotten rid of me. Whether we want to talk about these things or not, it happens, especially at exco level. There's always somebody trying to take you out. I always used to say when I coached, are you sure you want to be a C-level executive? Because I remember going to the boardroom thinking, okay, Eric's got a gun, this one's got a tank, I better bring an army. Yeah, no, it gets brutal as you go up the top. So you've got to be politically savvy.
Yeah.
You can't just, oh, that's IT governance, and I'm going to stop you there. You're not going to be around for long.
Yeah. And speaking of politically savvy, this is a great question from Kyler, our podcast co-host here, who's listening in the background. Her question is, how important is this business focus in IT in general? Even if the CIO is business savvy, but the greater department is not, does that cause misalignment? So in other words, if I'm a CIO, I'm focused on this political savviness, on the business, on the people side of change, all this other non-technology stuff, but I'm leading a team, a department that's very technologically focused, and they're not necessarily focused on those broader areas that we're talking about. How
Correct.
do you maintain that alignment? Does it create misalignment first and foremost? If so, how do we address that misalignment?
It definitely could create greater lines, and I'll talk from personal experience. So I joined an organization where the guys have been there for 20 odd years. Some of them were older than me, and they had this mindset of this is the way IT operates. So I had a simple thing that I would do when I joined an organization as a CIO. I would call everybody in the room at some point, because I used to do this team building things, and I would say, "Who is the customer?" And you'd be surprised what people say. It will be, oh, it's finance, it's sales, it's logistics. Or then at some point, somebody, and it's typically the younger people, would say, it's the people, it's the client, it's the customers of the company. So then I would have to do that mind shift. Do they shift and make that mind shift? No. So what I work on is percentages. If I can get about 60 to 80% of that floor focused on the business, the rest of them will either just have to shut up and go along with it, or but it's not possible to change all of them. Their mindset is so ingrained, but you just got to keep on at it. Now what helps you make that change is when the so typically, if you think about it, if you go into an organization where IT is not performing, they're not delivering, they're not helping, they're not focused on the true customer, then they seem to be back office, right? So if you come in and you making this change, and there's people in your team now, it's not like they're cheering when they see us coming along, but they're more receptive to us, and they see the change, and people want to come and work in IT. That's what helps you, because it's not about what I'm saying. Because if even if they still calling them the customer, the internal, who's now happy and saying this is great, we like this, that kind of keeps you at bay. You're not going to change everybody's mindset, but that's how you help make the change. It's not just you in that department, because ultimately, if you're offering a great service, and the revenue is growing, and board members are singing your praises and your team's praise and things, that helps make the change. But are
Yeah,
you going to get 100% on board? No, it's not possible, I found.
right.
Yeah, just get
Well, it's
enough.
almost like even if you have these resources that are very heavily focused on technology, and let's just say, you mentioned that 60 to 80% of them are going to come along and sort of transition to this more broader business focused mindset. But let's just say they don't, and you've got that subset of people that are extremely technical. They just like to build stuff. They like to be techies, for lack of a better word. They don't necessarily want to deal with the people or the process or the strategy side of things. Your job as a CIO in that situation, in my opinion, is oftentimes to be sort of a business analyst or a business architect, someone that can take the business needs and objectives and translate that into something that's more technical, but aligns with what the overarching goals and strategies of the organization are.
Correct.
So if you can do
Correct.
that well, then it's probably okay if you have a subset of people that are just technically focused, but it just puts more pressure on you as a leader to be able to do that translation and that interpretation of what the business needs are into the
Correct.
technical needs.
Because you still need them. It's not that you don't need them, right? But they tend to be. But definitely my leadership, my business analyst, I would walk my floor sometimes, and I would say, why are these business analysts sitting on my floor? They shouldn't be here. They should be out there,
Right.
unless you're typing up some requirements or something. So it's that subset, your leadership team, and that when they're out there, they must be focused on the business. If there's someone at the back who likes there to do reports and things like that, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing, but they can't be front facing. It's not going
Right.
to work. It's not going to work. Yeah.
Right. I don't know. Did you ever see the movie Office Space back in the 90s? Was that movie popular in Africa?
What was it about? Can you remind
It's
me?
it's the one where it's a comedy, and it's the one where they work for a tech company in the late 90s, and long story short, they're trying to retire early, so they come up with a scheme to skim transactions in the financial system to take money and basically get rich that way, and they wanted to use that to retire, and then they get caught. So it's just a whole
Okay.
story, but it's more than that. It's a
I
story about the
remember.
internal office politics and things of that nature. And there's a character in it, in Jennifer Aniston from the show Friends. She's in the movie. She's probably the best known actress in the show or in the movie. But in the
Mm.
movie, there's a character, I forgot his name, but he's like the translator from what the customer wants to what the engineering group has to do. And these efficiency consultants come in and start questioning everyone's jobs. Like, why are you doing what you do? And, how many people could we cut to save money in this organization? And they start asking this guy questions about, well, what is it you really do? Are you just translating the customer needs into the engineering needs? And why doesn't the customer just go directly to the engineer? And he sort of has a meltdown in the movie, and it's meant to be funny, but it's kind of true. He has a meltdown because he says, I'm good with people, and I understand people, and that's my role, and that's my value. But it's a really funny scene in the movie, but it kind of reminds me what we're talking about here reminds me of that, because that is sort of what the CIO has to do. Is you have to take all these crazy ideas that the business has, and you then have to translate it into something that the IT group can do. And if you don't have that effective CIO role there, you sort of, you cut out the middleman, but you need that middleman or middlewoman there to be able to translate those needs
Correct.
into the organization.
So here's what's interesting in how you put that. You said it's to, as the CIO, you have to translate what the business wants and then make it happen. Here's what's interesting, is to bring us back to the topic of what's going to get you fired. It's flipped now. You have to tell the business. You have to make sure your army is going to follow you to go and do what you need to do. So it is a bit of a balancing. It's a little bit of
Great
both.
point.
Yeah, there's always they come and they'll tell you this is our strategy, things like that. But you'll find that a lot more now CIOs will be leading. So if we look at like one of our banks who won the most innovative award a few years back, was where the CIO, a CEO realized the importance of IT. So he brought them to the foreground. I always used to say that if you go to these strategy sessions and you on day 2, the last person to present as the CIO, you're in trouble.
Right.
Because it's like, this is our strategy. You just need to enable it. It's flipped now, because you need to tell them, but we can use AI now. We should be using chatbots now on the front. We should be, So that's the change that I'm seeing. Or
That's a great
started already.
That's a great point. It's sort of you're right. It's a back and forth. It's a balancing act. You have business needs that are known by the organization that you have to translate into technical needs. But then there's emerging technologies, newer technologies that the business may not even know about or realize could help
Correct.
improve their business. So you have to know the business well enough and follow the business well enough to also be able to lead the business to say, you could use robotic process automation or human capital management software, whatever the needs are. There's all these different technologies out there you could be deploying. So that's more the technical piece, being able to recognize where the technology could best fit within the business and within the
Fit in that,
organization.
So it's also a difficult role. I'm just thinking now, because a lot of it is about shifting mindsets. So I coined this. I mean, I didn't coin the term. Gartner coined the term, and I used it. Said I was a digital evangelist. So you almost have to go out and hammer at the board level, at the, even within your own team, to make the shift to digital. Digital
Right.
doesn't just happen because you've got a great digital strategy. It happens because people want to make that change. It's a huge part of that change that you have to do. So I think the role is becoming even more difficult now, actually,
Yeah,
if you
I
think
agree.
about
There's
it.
just a lot of stuff you need to know and be good at to be effective in that
Mm.
role. Um, Here's another question, and maybe it's or a comment that I'll turn into a question here. This is from Cosmos on LinkedIn, and Cosmos says, "I got confused when the company I used to work for hired a CIO, and they have a VP of IT report to him. He wondered what each would be doing." Um, so I guess maybe I'll just broaden that question a bit and say, you've got VP of IT, you have IT manager, IT director, CIO, chief digital officer, chief technology officer, chief transformation officer. You have all these different technical roles. I mean, do you have any advice on how to make sense of it all? I mean, every organization is different, which you already mentioned, and every organization might define these roles differently. But how do you
Mm.
navigate the complexities of just the organization, the IT organization in general?
So it's interesting. I was talking to somebody that I hadn't worked with in years, and he said he phoned me about something, and he was talking. He said he watched our last live stream, and he said, I liked what you said. And there was, he said, you said, I think I said one of my pet peeves is the title. So I think it's important to not let the title hold you back. And I think it's got to the point now where people are even making fun of it, right? They've come up with chief something this, or chief, yeah. So I think it's important to not let the title hold you back. You've got to understand, okay, this is why I'm here and this is my role. But I think we mustn't get so caught up in it. And I'll tell you why, because we're in a state of flux. Because years ago, the CDO role came out, and I said, no, it's not going to work. And I was even arguing with Gartner at the time. I wasn't working with them. And I said it's because the CIO owns the army. He owns the IT department. So you bring this poor CDO and make all these changes, and the guy can just go like, no, it's not going to happen. But that's changed, right? Because now the CDO can say, okay, it's fine, I don't need you. You can go to the market. You can whatever you can. He's got access to global resources, so it's flipped. So I think we must be careful that we don't get too caught up. So if you think about it, what stayed consistent, it's COO, which is, I'll come to that one actually if we've got time to come. It's interesting. The COO role, CFO, CEO role has kind of remained, if you think about it, almost the same. You could say that's more or less where they are. I know I'm doing them a disservice, and hopefully there's nobody who's going to say, "What the hell?"
Right. Someone may
Of course,
disagree
we've
with you.
changed, and I do, I'm actually also a trained cost and management accountant, so I don't mean anything disrespectful by that. But you kind of know what they are, right? But the CIO role is an evolving role, is a changing role. I mean, when last did we hear that the CEO is an evolving role or a CFO is involved? But now, so obviously we're coming up with this like, what are we now? CTO, CIO, CDO. But I think the point I'm trying to make is whatever your title is, if it's a senior executive role and it's in a large organization, typically you need to focus on the business and use IT to drive revenue, drive down cost, grow the business, and be a senior executive. That's what you need to get, to understand. What I have seen was interesting. I've seen this in Africa where a CIO reports to a CTO.
Right.
And the reason that happened was because they couldn't get rid of the CIO, but they needed to bring somebody into this. Okay, we'll call you CTO and then make the CIO report to you. So I think we must be careful not to get too caught up in it. I think we're kind of lucky in IT that we're fluid. We've changed over the years. So the CIO title will, I think I said it on the long, will be called something else. It's will be moved on. It's going to change anyway.
Yeah, it's a misleading title in my opinion to call it chief information
Mm,
officer. I don't think it
doesn't make
doesn't.
sense anymore.
Yeah,
Mm,
in the 80s it did because that's what you're
yeah.
focused on is information and how do we digitize, just basic computerization of our data and our systems. But now it's evolved quite a bit. Um,
Mm,
and also, it's an interesting point though because I now that we're talking about it, I guess I haven't thought that much about this until this conversation, but it does seem like organizationally, a lot of organizations make the mistake of wiring the organizational structure around the weaknesses of the leader they have in place now. So in other words, a lot of times we work with clients where they have an IT director, or maybe they call them CIO, that have been in that role for say 20 years, and they are tasked with leading some sort of transformation. We need to overhaul our systems or put in new technologies or just get caught up to the 21st century. And that person doesn't have the skill set or the competency. So they end up creating another role like a chief, transformation officer or a chief digital officer, whatever it is. And it's almost like there's a fine line between augmenting the skill sets you don't have versus a key leadership role like that, where the person in the leadership role doesn't have the right skill set. So you end up creating another leadership role, which will inevitably over time get sucked into the status quo because that person that had been there for 20 years in the CIO role is probably going to revert back to what they know best and back to their comfort zone. So you have to sort of rethink, do you have the right person in that role to begin with? Do you maybe need to put in someone over that person that used to be an effective CIO, but now that the role has evolved, that person hasn't been able to keep up? Maybe you need someone over them that sort of provides that. And that's obviously a very messy
correct.
organizational dynamic, but it seems like more organizations need to be a little more strategic rather than just throwing a band-aid on the problem.
Correct.
So along those lines, then, speaking of CIOs and, developing the skill set you need to be more effective in the 2020s versus what it took in the 1980s or 1990s when the role was first emerging. This is from Diane on LinkedIn. She asked, any specific education paths that you'd recommend for the CIO role? There's quite a few CIO specific courses. Would those be more applicable than an MBA? So maybe just in general, what sort of training and upskilling would you recommend that CIOs or aspiring CIOs might go through?
So I would say yes. MBA is not a bad thing to have, and we find that more and more. When they advertise for these positions, they will say MBA, right, or Bachelor of Commerce in Science or Informatics or that. I think if you could, like the more business courses you could do, makes sense. And especially, let's say if you're in an organization where you say I'm in financial services, then it makes sense to do financial services courses, right? So that you can start to 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 play a bigger role. And don't overlook things like some of us are just born naturally that they can just do this, which is public speaking, communication, because it's going to push you more and more into the limelight in that role. So it's important to do the soft skills. I would say there are a lot of CIO courses out there. I would say be wary. Rather go with the more established ones. I like the ones, for example. So I've had a few of people who worked for me over the years who went on these courses, and they, for example, they flew to America, to Silicon Valley, and then got worked with some of the startups there. I thought that's great, right? But if you're going to do an online CIO course, it's not really going to teach you how to be a CIO. There is no one answer to this. I mean, if you just heard, I said I'm a qualified cost and management accountant, but I'm also in IT. But it helped me with budgeting and things like that. So I think the MBA definitely tick that one. If you want to do a CIO course, make sure it's something reputable. Ask around, see what, and go and look at what they're actually going to do. Right? Well, what are they actually going to offer you on this that an MBA might offer you? Because everybody climbs on the bandwagon and say, "Oh, CIO," and then education, and then just teach you the bland sort of stuff. But I think the other important thing is don't look at the soft skill stuff. Do those, try and get an executive coach, for example, if that will help you. But
Right.
but you need to be almost like an all-rounder. That's my feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a shameless plug for some of Third Stage's content. Third Stage Consulting, the company that you and I both work for, has quite a bit of content out there that's meant to be educational, informative, and helping CIOs and leaders, just understand some of the technologies and some of the digital strategies that are most effective in today's world. So if you go to the Third Stage, either Third Stage Consulting and or my own personal YouTube channels and LinkedIn pages, both of those are good avenues that, we post different content on those two channels. So I'd recommend checking out both my personal LinkedIn and YouTube, as well as the Third Stage Consulting LinkedIn and YouTube channels too, because we're always putting stuff out there. Every day we put new content out, or most days of the week there's new content being put out there. So that's good stuff. I was going to ask you. Oh, I wanted to bring up another comment from Kyler, because she's trying to stir the pot here. She's behind the scenes. We can't see her, but here she is. She's kind of throwing grenades at us here as we're in the live stream, which I like. She's saying, so what Kyler's saying is, maybe this is an unpopular opinion, but when it comes to flexibility and overall ability to change, I'd say CIOs are one of the leadership positions that are least likely to have any appetite for change. And boom, she just threw it out there just like that. So what are your thoughts? Do you agree? Do you disagree? And why?
I say it's because, like I always say, we can't brand everybody the same, right? So you can put and I come from, I worked with like 30 CIOs at any point in time, or run workshops with 20 or 30 CIOs in the room. So yes, you might have the title, but don't forget you're also dealing with the human being. So some of us are more prone to change. So I don't think it's got anything to do with the title, that the fact that you're a CIO and that you're not willing to change. It depends on the individual. It depends where you are in your. I mean, if you've been a CIO at the same company for 20 odd years, which we have seen, I've seen CIOs retire from the same way. They're less likely to change. But if I show you a 30-something chief digital officer, very likely to change. So boom, back at you, kind of.
Right.
Throws another one.
Right. Well, here's another bombshell while we're on the thread here, and this is from Sam on LinkedIn. I really like this question as well, and it's sort of taking a dig at executive teams throughout the world. So I'd be curious to get the audience's perspective on this too, but I'll ask you first, Ridwaan.
Mm.
Is there a problem when CXOs who can build a spreadsheet think they know more than the CIO, CDO, or CTO? which I think is a super funny question, but yet very relevant, very true. You get,
It's a
people.
funny. So I would have come across this kind of a problem. I was never a CIO of a smaller organization, but coming through the ranks as a support person, or what they used to call us, if you remember, system administrators, or
Yeah.
and then we became like IT managers. Yes, then I would deal with those kind of individuals. So that was many years ago. But once you start working for the bigger organizations, and I didn't come across that. So it'd be interesting what the audience say. What I did come across, what I used to call the brother-in-law syndrome. So you would be at the office, and then your CEO would come and call you to his office to talk to you about some new thing that his brother-in-law, when they were when they were playing golf, he told him about. Did you
Right.
hear about this thing called chatbots? And like, why are you guys not doing it? And then that's what I used to call brother-in-law syndrome. But I think this is something different, right? So basically, you're saying you've, and it's interesting because let's be honest, if you're a CIO that's been in the game for a long time, you are faced with a workforce, because I think we've got something like 3 different generations in the workplace now. You are faced with younger people there. They might be more technology savvy than you. It is. So what do you have to back yourself up is your leadership skills, your experience. So that's how you bat that back. But I've never had that where a CEO said, "I'm good at a spreadsheet, so I know more than you." I'd like
Right.
to hear what the audience says. I've never come across that
Right.
as a
Yeah.
CIO.
And
No.
I think it's, it's maybe a way to broaden that question or statement is just a, lack of understanding of technologies and what modern technologies can do beyond what a spreadsheet can do. And how do you, when an executive thinks they've got the answers, they think they have it figured out, but they don't fully understand the technology.
Mm.
Maybe that's the broader question there. I don't know if
And that
that's a matter
again
of
is more.
education.
No, sorry, but again, that's more of a personality thing, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. And I can tell you now, that guy is telling his CFO he knows more than the CFO, and he's telling his whoever, I know more than you, and he's telling, yeah.
Right. Right. And here's,
Well,
you have at least one person on the line that agrees with a comment you made earlier, Ridwaan, and this is from Donald on LinkedIn. He says, "You don't know the craziness I see from the executive level in the government." Um, and then is
yeah.
followed. That kind of builds on what you'd said earlier. But this is actually an even more important point that he makes as a follow up. This is also from Donald on LinkedIn. He says they think IT is only help desk, and I think that's a difficult mindset shift, not just for IT leaders, but also for organizations in general, is to view
Mm.
IT not as a help desk, not as just a support function, but more of a strategic enabler of the organization. I know it's a
Yeah.
big question, but how do you recommend organizations navigate that
So
challenge?
it's going to be a bit unfair how I'm going to answer, but also I'll give another perspective of why things are the way that are sometimes, right? So that my initial reaction to that is, well, then this your CIO should be more strategic, right? Which we know. If if you're in a multinational, let's think about it. Let's choose one of the big multinational, and they think IT is only help desk. Something wrong with that CIO, right? Because he's got the opportunity to be whatever, or she. But I think Donald's talking about it in government, and I've had the experience in government. Yes, then I understand that, because they do have a different mindset, a different. It's not profit driven. It's more politically motivated, and you typically find in government that, and it's interesting that CIOs not only report to and have the title CIO, not only report to the CFO, they also report to the corporate services executive, not even the COO. So they're seen as corporate services. So that's where that mindset, oh, it's just a help thing. Because let's be honest, in government, how crazy can you get? Actually,
Right.
you can't. And the other problem you have there is that your leadership. Well, we see that in Africa changes very often in government. There's a lot of churn at that
Right.
level. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Mm.
So, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see CIOs make, and that you've seen them make in recent years?
So I think when they become complacent, so if you think, and I think I spoke about it a lot of time, it's this thing of urgency addiction. So, and I had it coming through IT, I came through the help desk. You wait for something to go wrong, or you go and tinker so that something can go wrong. It's that
Right.
to get, yeah. So what I find is that You can't wait. You can't be an order taker. Don't sit back and wait for the business to ask you for something. So I've done that. That was great, right? We rolled out X number of laptops and everybody's that's fantastic. But you got to go back to, once you've done that, you can't just rest on your laurels. You got to go and look for something else now. What else can I do? How else can I make a difference in the business? Because I think the thing that I find, especially when the guys get older, is when things start humming and you have something like a 99% uptime, they tend to, okay, I'm going to wait it out now. I'm chilling, I think that's the mistake that I see. I think those days are gone. You can sit back and wait for your retirement. You're going to be taken out. I think
Right.
that's, they need to now keep up on their game all the
Right.
time. I think that's important.
Right. Right. Um, what about making sure that they have buy-in into their changes and into the transformations? What are some of the tactics or strategies that CIOs can use to ensure that they have that level of buy-in as they lead change in their organizations?
To get the buy-in. So the important thing is what we call business value of IT, right? So everything that you're talking, everything that you're presenting, even when you're presenting a budget of why you're doing something, your output is always focused on what they're trying to achieve as an organization. So it's important that when you're sitting, and I'm guilty of it when I started out as a CIO, is to sit in the exec, and when the CIO used to start talking, I used to switch off. It's like I'll wait for my turn. But those days are gone. So you got to listen to what everything is happening around you all the time. So that when you come in and you sell something, you're talking there using their language. Then they also, depending on which organization you're in, they also use technical language or using their language, and making sure that you have a relationship with them. That's very important. Like I use that example of the COO. We used to support each other on certain initiatives, you know. Um, and that's why I kind of allowed him to do his shadow IT, so that when I came and said, "Hey, I want to do this," so it's about being politically savvy, being aware, because sometimes you think, "Man, this is a great thing. AI is the best thing for this company ever." I've done all the research, I've looked at all the white papers, and then you come in and you try and sell it like that. Like, what the hell? You got to talk to, what do they say in change management? I mean, heart, minds, and feet. I think it is. So that's what you need to do. So you have to be a bit of a change agent and understand these human traits, I think, to get them
Yeah.
to make the change. People don't change because it's the right thing to do. People
Right.
change because they feel passionate about it, or they want to make the change. If that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Mm.
Here's a comment from LinkedIn. Being purely reactive has come and gone. You have to focus on how to be proactive and only be reactive on those edge cases. Um,
100%.
that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense given everything we're talking about how the role has evolved since the
Mm.
1980s. That's definitely true here today.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess just to one more question, then I'll have sort of a capstone question to come to follow up on. But what tech trends should CIOs be most aware of in the 2020s? So we've sort of touched on a few different things like AI and
Yeah.
robotic process automation and stuff like that. But what are some of
Yeah.
the different things that we should be aware of, or challenges we should be aware of, or I'm sorry, trends we should be aware of with technology?
So I think this whole, I mean, it's very topical at the moment, and it's a real thing. It's the whole hybrid working, right? It's people being able to work anywhere. I think that's like a very, very important right now, and I think it's going to be top of mind because of retaining talent, things like that. My stepson is in IT, and he's very upset because he has to go back to an office. So somebody like him could decide, hey, I'm going to do hybrid work. So I think it's important to enable that. How do you enable that as a CIO, hybrid working for employees? And then I want to turn the thing about what tech trends you should be watching, and I'll tell you why I'm going to say it like this. So remember, I come from Gartner. We used to have this top 10 technology trends, and all these trends, and I can say it now because I've left. A lot of those trends are not relevant to you. So the way you need to look at this is from a customer perspective, which Peter Drucker used to call the outside in. How does your customer interact with you, right? What is it it need? Then what are the tech trends that's gonna then change that? And then on the other end, you look at it the way Steve Jobs said. He said the customer doesn't know what he wants, so I will create these
Mhm.
kind of things. So I
Yeah.
think when you look at this stuff, don't get caught up in the hype. Yes, there's some stuff we can't deny. Becoming data-driven organizations. People ask me, why did I do digital transformation? I said I'm putting things in place because I want the data. Because the data, then I could give it to AI. If I had AI, I could start predicting. So I think that's the important thing is look at it not so much from what are the technology trends, what are the customer trends, what's happening with your customer, and then you apply your technology to that. And then it's a little bit of both. And you look at so what are some of the important trends? I think it's that whole hybrid working, so that people can work from everywhere. AI most definitely is not going away. If anything, it's going augmented reality, virtual reality, the metaverse. People still laugh at me when I talk about that, but if Snoop Dogg is in there, it's the place. It's the place to be. So
It's starting to get mainstream if he's embracing it.
yeah, it's slowly but surely. So I think yeah, look at it like that from from what is your customer, what is impacting on your customer in terms of technology trends, and then go there. Then make sure you're in that space, because if you're not, your competitor's going to be there while you playing around with this latest technology in house.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it's you hit a good point, which is there's a fine line between um, adopting emerging technologies where appropriate, where the business needs are, but there's a temptation to go too far and to go too far down the Steve Jobs path, which is let's envision something that the organization could adopt to. And you want some of that, but if you go too far, what ends up happening is you end up with a bunch of shelfware. You overinvest in a bunch of technology that you can't get business value out of. Steve Jobs, it's easy to emulate or to want to emulate Steve Jobs, but he really
Mm,
was a sort of a once in a lifetime sort of technology leader.
correct.
Most people don't just aren't at that level, and not to dismiss the intelligence of the rest of us in the world, but he's just on a whole
Mm,
different uh, planet, really, in terms of intelligence and his vision. So you can have
correct.
some Steve Jobs. You just don't want to go too far, because if you get too far, if you try to go too far down that path, we see a lot of organizations that,
Mm,
like metaverse is a great example. If you could double down on the metaverse right now, but what are you going to do with it as a
mm,
business? What
mm,
you're going to sit on
correct.
that technology and try and figure it out for years, and maybe it'll pay off someday, but there's also a likelihood that you distract the organization, you overinvest in technology that's not mature yet, it doesn't
Waste
support your
money.
business needs, and creates a lot of challenges. So I think there's
Mm,
a balancing act that's needed there.
100%. Mm,
Yeah. So I guess the
that's
last question I have for you, just to wrap up the conversation here, is what is the biggest single piece of advice that you would give to either it's to people that are already CIOs, or people that are aspiring to be a CIO? What advice, or what takeaways would you leave them with so they could be more successful in their jobs?
So I think it's leadership, right? So this whole thing about transformative leadership. So move away from, it's been around for a while. So move away from the whole transactional leadership to more transformational leadership. Um, and then it's about like what almost like what we're doing now. It's like getting your profile out there, doing more public speaking, getting be seen as a thought leader, that kind of thing, because that's what actually organizations are looking for as well. They want the CIOs to be at the front of, so that people are interested in their companies, because it's a way of revenue generation down the line. Oh, this is a thought leader, this is a great company, and also to attract talent to your company. So still do the courses, your IT courses, that if you're coming through the ranks, because I'm sure both you and South Eric will tell any youngster that pay your school fees.
Right.
Yeah, come through the ranks, and it's always stood me in good stead, because that's why I could manage so many diverse individuals in my department, because I did most of their jobs. Um, but I think the other important thing is become more business savvy as well. Start figuring out business savvy. And the thing I want to say is it's I can't remember his name now. He said the ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn. That's the most important thing, especially in a CIO role. It's constantly changing.
Hmm.
It's not for the faint-hearted. So if you think it's a role that I'm going to reach this, and then once I'm there, I'm I'm good, then it's not for you. It's a constantly changing, reinventing yourself type of role.
Right. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. That's a great place to leave it. Constantly reinvent yourself and push your boundaries to learn more. And if you're not strong in certain areas like the political piece of it or the people change management side of things, the operational business process side of things, whatever it is, just really push yourself to expand your horizons on that front, which is, you could say that for any role in any organization, but especially the CIO
Correct.
role, I think more so.
Especially, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially
Well, good.
so.
Well,
Yeah.
well, that's a great
Good.
place to leave it. I want to thank you for your time here today, Ridwaan,
Thank
and
you.
really appreciate having you here again today.
It was
To the
great.
audience, thank you for being here too, and thanks for the great questions. We had some really good conversation here, so really appreciate it. Again, you can find this interview will get edited and baked into our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast, which comes out every Wednesday. You can find new episodes on YouTube, LinkedIn, as well as all the audio podcast platforms. So if you don't subscribe to Transformation Ground Control, I highly encourage you to. Be sure to share it with your colleagues. It's a great learning resource. We typically do 2+ hours in each episode every week. So there's tons of different guests and content that we cover in those episodes. So we encourage you to check that out. So thank you everyone for being here. Hope you all have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next Tuesday on our next weekly live stream. Have a great week in the meantime.
Great.
Take care.
Yeah.
All
Thanks.
right. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Take
Cheers.
care.
Bye, everybody.
Cheers.
Bye bye.